koutou, koroa, ko Hakarangi, te maunga, ko Mangahea, te awa, ko Uawanui te whenua, ko Waituhi ahau e noho ana. Ko Sandy Baltapu Papa and ko Corin Baltapu Mama Bridget. Papa ahau he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Mike and I are first going to speak about the Hort Centre, Hort area, and cropping.
You have to, sorry, just interrupting, you need to speak up so acoustics are
Good.
yeah, just loud.
Speak up louder.
Good. I've actually got a very loud voice, so that's good. If I turn my hearing aids off, I actually shout. Okay, so Mike and I have been asked to present on. Can you all hear me? Is it okay? A bit louder?
A bit louder, like
Bit
this.
louder.
Yeah.
Mike and I have been asked to present on cropping and hort. So it was originally just hort, but of course cropping comes in with it, and it's the intensive growing of produce. So how does our sector use and rely on the land? Well, Te Tairawhiti has excellent alluvial soils, which hold moisture and nutrients well, with minimum leaching. We have high sunshine hours with high UV and a good rainfall, sometimes very good. We have, historically, we have had excellent quality and quantity of water as well, and we've also had, and that has come from rainfall, aquifers, rivers and bores. The Tairawhiti soils and climate are advantageous for hort and cropping practices. Some examples are, which you'll all know these, but it's surprising how big it is, sweet corn, maize, squash, lettuce, silver beet, spinach, kale, everything that you grow in your gardens at home, plus melons, berries, oranges, lemons, mandarins, apples, kiwi fruit, nashis, pear, plums, bananas, beetroot, potatoes, komoro, yams, beans, peas, flowers, pumpkin, and so it goes on. And within each of these areas, there are many sub-areas. And the reality is that this district, Te Tairawhiti, is really the food bowl of New Zealand. And we must remind ourselves how lucky we are, both in all of the areas up the coast, the Waipu, Uawa, right down through Poverty Bay. We have fabulous soil. In fact, our soils and our climate and our growing conditions are considered to be in the top 4 of the world. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to look after them? We all have an ownership of that land and the people that work it. So I think over the last few years, especially the last 30, that a lot of people have started to feel abstract from their whenua. We've had a large amount of international companies buy into New Zealand. The majority of the East Coast is now planted and owned by, not just planted, not leased, but owned by overseas companies, such as IKEA. Don't buy those products. Every time you buy them, you're putting some more carbon in the air.
What's your brand name?
IKEA. Both highly technical machinery and older machinery can be used to produce most of these crops I've just talked about. The Hort Centre is heavily labour intensive and also has a big technical requirement. Maize and sweet corn are more machine dependent, but much of the horticulture also relies on highly skilled staff, especially in apples and kiwi fruit. So that's the end of question 1 for me. Mike, did you want to add anything in there?
I think we're growing kiwi fruit, as probably a lot of you know, and yeah, it is what Bridget said. It's we've got high sunshine hours and it's highly fertile dirt. That's the East Coast, Tairawhiti, the whole thing. So Yeah, we're feeling pretty left out at the moment, and the opportunity for employment is huge. The kiwifruit, it's a single desk selling system. It's the only setup in the Western world where it's a single desk, and the 5-year outlook is very, very good for kiwifruit. The prices are consistent, barring a world war, as we say. So they've got good systems in place, employing people. The pastoral care for people, the workers, even the owners are good. We have our moments with adversity, but it's a very positive industry to be in, and it employs a lot of people. And yes, that's sort of a bit of an add-on there, and there's opportunity for that to expand. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good.
And Uawa especially. How is your sector affected by the cyclone or other events, including dry weather? And what future effects do you foresee? Well, obviously our sector was unfortunately affected to a disastrous degree, as were many other sectors. We were affected both from natural and man-made events. The last one could not have hit at a more vulnerable stage. Hail plus Gabriel within 3 weeks, because the crops were ready to go. And the same thing happened in Cyclone Bowler. We were farming the same piece of land at that time. And it was as big a disaster, if not bigger. However, in Cyclone Bowler, we mainly had water with some silting, but no logs, no debris, and there was no heavy, low nutrition or low nitrogen silt, which comes straight out of monocultural and monocultural forests. And that means that the nutrition's low, the biological activity is low, and unfortunately, that is the big difference between the Bowler flooding and this flooding. So the silt that came with Bowler was mainly off farms that were having input of nitrogen. There was a lot of native that grows underneath the native forests came down, and it was fantastic. Anyway, so we just want to say that large amounts of putia can be gained or lost overnight in our industry, which have monumental impacts on both the whānau, the whenua, and the wai. Personally, the logging debris, silt and water inundated our rohi in every conceivable way, affecting marae, entire properties, the roading, bridges. Every bridge in the district acted as a slash catcher. Most of them stayed up. Homes, beaches, before finally settling on top of our kaimoana breeding grounds. Machinery was unable to operate safely, and he tangata, the people, did not like to work in these conditions, and they were not safe. We have felt paralysed from the fear of rules and red tape since, because to fix these problems we need consenting.
Sorry, we didn't go.
2 minutes? 2 minutes? Is that
Yeah,
what you
that's very quick.
said? Okay, quickly,
I'll
number
just
three.
say just a very quick plea on the red tape. As we are looking to our leaders, they have got to make clearer and quicker decisions and not just get unravel what's happened and we've just got to move on, or we're going to basically sink and die. So we have to get up and listen to us that are on the land.
Yeah,
All
okay.
you people that anyway.
So solutions, I'm just going to say this really quickly, you'll just have to pad it out later. Sustainable energy, wind, water, wave, wood, solar. There's plenty of them that we need to get stuck in and use. Recycling of both product and the wai. Selective harvesting of both freshwater, saltwater, indigenous species such as gum, redwoods, totara. A big factor that we feel is that we need to look at rail and we need the government to rail through the Waiweka Gorge. They need to rail north, come off the sea. The roading needs to leave the sea. The majority of problems out there are to do with our roads falling into the sea. They do it all over the world. They rail. We need to come inland, and we need to rail up, down and through. There's no reason that we couldn't do that, and we would have a much safer and stronger infrastructure. We need to get storage of wine, storage and supply of water needs to be improved hugely, and it should be rohi-led. Overseas investment needs to be halted as far as Pinus radiata goes in this district. And that land needs to be gifted back to hapu. At least 50% of the current people logging this district are ruining it, polluting it. They need to go, and that land should be broken up and sent back to hapu of the East Coast. We need to protect our minerals, not listen to Shane Jones. We need to support the walk around the coast, the tourism. And I think we need to think about the amazing things that our forebears have done here. They built huge wharves. They built amazing bridges. They built an incredible harbour, where my grandfather died actually, building it. They built ships. They sent meat, frozen meat from our freezing works here overseas. We are clever. We are resourceful. We are creative. We must not degrade the Māori of the water of the wrong purpose. We need to store it, look after it, and respect it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget and Mike. And next up we have Kerry Wilson.
Kia ora everybody. Okay. Do you want my PPR? No. Okay, all good. I won't.
Just go.
So my sector. I'll start first of all. I'm Kerry Worsnop. I'm a sheep and beef farmer, originally born in Rotorua. I moved here out of school. My first job was on the coast, and basically ever since then that has felt like my home. My sector is the sheep and beef industry, which, as most of you will be aware, is the dominant land use in the region by a mile. About 360,000 hectares of the region is in sheep and beef land. It was primarily all taken out of either fernland, scrub or native trees within the last probably 130, 40 years. Some a little bit before that, but not a lot. And a big reason why that land was taken out was that the government of the day thought that we all should develop New Zealand and become more prosperous, and a way that they saw that that should happen was that we would develop farms and we would sell things to the world to pay for our development, pay for our roads, pay for towns and things that obviously weren't here previously. So the sector that evolved over time has changed a lot. Pretty much unrecognisably, to be honest. In its early years, New Zealand had a lot of speculative buyers who bought huge tracts of land from overseas, like massive tracts. The area west of Gisborne at one point had 4 major owners who owned incredible amounts of land, but they didn't actually farm it, they just held it. They bought it often off banks who had mortgaged the Māori landowners before them. So we have a painful past in some ways in terms of how this land ended up freeholded. But the government at the end of the 1800s basically said, well, we don't think that these massive landowners are very good for New Zealand. So they forced the breakup of a lot of those farms. And that happened over a period really that didn't stop until after World War II, where the land was parcelled up, and the government actually essentially gave cheap loans and paid for things like development and land clearing so that People would come and develop the land and create local economies, build towns around them, etc. By the end of roughly the 80s, the government funding of this, which was enormous by the way, at one point it was about a third of New Zealand government's expenditure, was being spent essentially supporting and developing New Zealand farms. The reason we have a highly developed agricultural sector in New Zealand is because as an entire country for 100 years, that was what we focused on building. And we built it. We are now probably one of the leading agricultural producers in the world because as a whole country, that's what we put our energy into. But by the 80s, that system of funding collectively the agriculture sector had run out of room. We were actually losing money, we were losing our productivity, and our farmers were wards of the state. We basically asked the government for money instead of our markets. So the government deregulated and it said, no, you're on your own. Out there, guys, go and make your own money, sell to the world. And the farms that we have now are essentially the ones that survived that massive change. So if you could not make your own money by becoming more efficient and by developing ways of producing sheep meat and cattle meat from whatever land you had access to, you weren't a farmer anymore. You had to leave and do something else. So obviously that happened roughly around the time of Bowler. And of course, farming was pretty dire in the years after subsidies were removed. And Bowler was really the nail in the coffin for a lot of East Coast farms. A lot of people walked off in a nutshell. They saw the subsidies that were offered for forestry. They knew that they weren't really able to see any light at the end of the tunnel, and they sold. The Martin Road's a great example, where within 5 years, virtually every farm on that road sold in quick succession. The land that stayed in farmland was generally thought to be basically, people could see a way through. They could see a way to farm through Bowler. They could see a way to try and remediate the damage that happened. And so the sector that I came into 20 years ago had already spent quite a bit of time planting willows and poplars, especially under the East Coast Deforestation Scheme. It uses the land in a way to the second, probably the third question a little bit. We use the land essentially for grazing livestock at an extensive scale. So globally, if you look at how meat is produced, it's not produced the way we produce it. It's typically produced in a housed system where they will grow grain on huge areas, they will harvest the grain, take it in, feed it to animals that are in a large, or actually massive barn. We don't do that. We put fences up and we say, look, basically help yourselves, guys. And when you finish the grass there, we'll move it here and you help yourselves again. It's probably the lowest impact, lowest input is the better word. It's the lowest input land use that New Zealand has, with the exception probably of carbon farming and in some cases forestry. Because the inputs that you use are very minimal. There's not really any need in a pastoral system for a pesticide. You're essentially using grasses that are just growing naturally. You can augment that with more nutrients, but as you've heard from the Parkers, we have incredibly fertile land in this region. There are many people who do still farm land in this region with no fertiliser at all, which is unheard of in many other areas in New Zealand. We have a really, really fantastic growing climate, which is part of why those farmers post-Bowler who looked around and saw complete chaos didn't give up. Because, and I can attest to this, because our farm got smashed. We have 2 blocks, and we looked around after up the coast. It was actually after the storm, the April storm a year before Gabriel, and it was worse than Bowler at that time. And then, of course, there was Gabriel and hail, and then the June storms as well. And you could look around and think, oh my God, how will you come back from that? But then, what are we now? We're 2 years past that, and most of the slips are grassed over. most of the interventions that you put in place to kind of get your infrastructure back up and running, you know, they're actually within your capacity to adapt to. And so in the way that farming kind of has an adaptive capacity that you see what's happened and you can respond to it. And I think the major thing that we can do going forward is to look at what we've done in the past and learn from it. Because every season, we all have as farmers maybe 40 chances in our lifetime as farmers. Every year you get a new season, and that season's another chance to do better. It's a chance to improve on what you had last year. And over 50 years, you should have come a long, long, long way. So I'm 20 years in, and I can say the way I farm now, it's really different to what it was 20 years ago. And in 20 years from now, it'll probably be really different to what it is now. Every year we try and adapt to what nature's telling us, to what markets are telling us, and to what resources we have available. I think what we need to do going forward, and I spent a year studying this in terms of trying to understand how agricultural policy can work better in the land-based environment. People who live on the land care about it. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to live on a farm. If you live in a rural village, you care about what's happening around you. People who are close to the effect care about the cause. Give them more accountability and more responsibility for solutions, because high-level policy responses are almost always going to blow up with a different problem somewhere else. We saw that with the blue line, where we just said, hey, half the coast needs to go into forestry. If that had been the decision of people who were in those communities, they would have picked and chose what they did on each parcel of land. They would probably have done very little blanket planting. But we need to make those decisions more local to the people who are affected by them. And as people on the land, sheep and beef farmers are about as close as you'll get. They can tell you right down to the slip what impact the cyclone has had on them, because they walk it every day. They see it more than anyone sees it. So yeah, my take-home message would be, take the learning. We have a lot of it, we need to use it.
Kia ora koutou, ko Rikurangi Te Maunga, ko Waiapu Te Awa, ko Raukomara Te Ngahere, ko Ngāti Parau Te Iwi, no Tikapa Auau. Who knows where Tikapa is? Yeah, not too many, that's how we like it. So it's a little sleepy hollow at the end of the road into Rua. So yeah, we live at the mouth on the south side of the Waiapu, and yeah, every time it rains heavy, we lose more and more land. It either gets buried over or washed out to sea. So, and I've lived there for most of my life, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. So yeah, applaud you all for the kaupapa this group is on. It's it really is a big issue for our region. So yeah, my background is pretty much 30 years of environmental restoration based around Aotearoa, and trying to put pieces back together, and based up at home mostly. Yeah, with a big focus around the Raukomara. So my relationship with the Raukomara probably started as a 4 or 5-year-old, following my old man around. He used to do every winter possum skins. Was a pretty lucrative side earn, and we'd just follow him up the rivers, and he'd be just laying cyanide paste, and by the end of the day, after he was happy enough that enough cyanide paste was down, we'd sort of look around for a bank or whatever, and he'd light a fire under it and smoke all the old spiders out and chuck some ferns underneath, and that was home for the night. So we did that every school holidays, especially during the winter months. We only stuck to the rivers because up the sides was just a tangled nightmare. So deer were just starting to come into the picture then, and same with possums. So this beautiful place full of birds, rivers were full of blue ducks and everything. And so that was the childhood. in regards to you know, what I do and the part that the Raukumara plays in this kaupapa is for 30 years I worked for the Department of Conservation, and during that time period I pretty much watched it go from the Garden of Eden to the empty shell it is today. And so that's all due to lack of funding, or, you know, Gisborne's a long way from Wellington, if I try and be polite or PC. But yeah, really heartbreaking as somebody that, you know, passionate about our flora and fauna and watching it pretty much vanish. So Kerry spoke earlier about when all our Indigenous cover was forests were converted into pastoral farms, and pretty soon after that happened, scientists at the time noticed that the erosion rates were you know, increasing and accelerating really. So no real surprise. We got the soft geologies and you know, the predictions that from way back in the 40s, even might have been earlier, that if nothing was done about the erosion, the lower reaches of our main rivers would end up being swamp basically, and that's what's happening today. So yeah, so as far as the role that conservation plays, all our rivers on the main rivers anyway, the Waiapu and the Waipawa, they have their sources in the Raukumara, and it's got the real fragile geology as well. I call it Weet-Bix rock. So it was all good when it was all held together and knitted, you know, with the tree roots and big thick canopy over the top. But now a lot of that's been compromised, and so our forests, the higher parts of the ranges, get up to 5 or 6 meters of rainfall a year. It's probably more now since in the last 5 years, but that's a lot of water. And our forests have lost our Indigenous forests have lost their protection values. And what I mean by that is that there was, I can remember first going out there, and then even, you know, in the skinning days, you could just sleep in the moss, and the moss would be up to your knees or deeper. And a lot of that's all gone. It's been, the deer have either eaten it or trampled it. And so anyone that's been in there, has anyone been in the Raukumara? Not many, eh? So that's a big part of the issue as well. No one sort of witnessed what happened. But those protection values, 30% of the rainfall is intercepted by the canopy, 30%, like the branches and the trunk, is just covered in moss, and then 30%, or what remains, hits the forest floor, and you had all your the duff layer, the mossy carpet. It would soak up all that rain and then slow release it through the year. So it would regulate our river flows. Didn't matter if it was a drought or whatever. It would just slow release. It was a giant sponge, and at the same time it would recharge all our aquifers down where we live. And so all of that has been lost. And so now the deer have just eaten everything underneath. And, you know, people sort of challenge me on that one. Well, I said, well, you know, the ranges are a couple of 100,000 hectares. And I said, well, you shout us the helicopter and we'll spin the beer bottle, and wherever it stops, we'll go there and I'll show you. It all looks the same now, which is sad. So the urgency really is to get those protection values back, because it's a waste of time trying to save kiwis and whatever, and their house is falling to bits. So protection values first, which affects us who all live down in the lower reaches of the rivers. And so same with the Waipawa, or you can keep building stop banks higher and higher, but if the catchments are falling to pieces, those stop banks will be overwhelmed. It'll be just, there's a cyclone just over there next to the horizon that'll undo all the good work. So yeah, not trying to sound like the doom and gloom merchant, but I would yeah, just witnessed all of that happen. So conservation plays a big part in this, because if we're looking at trying to plant our way out of this, we need to get on top of all those pest animals. And so the deer are a huge issue for our region, not just in the conservation land, but also out on the farms and stuff. And so get rid of all the deer, wave the wand and get rid of them off the farms. But the deer and the rangers will just keep, there'll be a forever source population to keep coming out and undoing all the good work that, you know, we're about to try and do. So as far as solutions, we've got a project going at the moment, so local with a Paimoga. Before it was just myself and one other dock ranger that, you know, were tasked with trying to keep our fingers on the pulse as far as what was happening in the tile space, the environmental space. And now there's 40 people that are all locals that are getting their fingers back into the dirt basically, and learning how the tile how it works. So, you know, what we're dealing with is 6 generations of disconnect. I think that's how long farming's been here. And so that the knowledge about how this all worked pre-human has been it's only a shadow of what it used to be. We're lucky, you know, compared to other iwi. We had people like Apira Nangata, who was in Parliament at the time, and he was a real forward thinker, and he managed to document a lot of that mātauranga and traditional knowledge. So I've been, you know, it's a passion of mine, so scrolled through all of this stuff and hung out with those few and far between knowledge holders. And so, yeah, huge kaupapa in front of us. Yes, so kia ora.
Thanks, Graham. Sorry, I didn't want to push it off the stage.
No, that's right.
Next up we have Renee Aroa.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Introduced myself this morning, but for those who weren't here, ko Renee Aroa tōku ingoa. No Rangitukia aho. If you haven't been to Rangitukia, head as far east as you can before you start coming back around again. That's where I had the absolute privilege of growing up on our whenua there. He uri tēnei no Ngāti Porou, and I live here in Gisborne. But today, the pōta I'm wearing is one of kind of sharing our journey on our whenua at Te Kotaku, and the space that we have been playing in, I guess, and starting to explore in nature markets as a way to bring revenue in onto the whenua, into the hands of the people who are working the whenua, for the good work that they do that actually connects that whenua to outcomes that the globe is needing now. These are things like freshwater enhancement, bringing back more of our native biodiversity, recloaking our whenua, where we've had a history of taking a lot of that cover off, farming, a little bit of exotic planting, a bit of forestry. We've had a history of doing all sorts of innovative things as well, like tiger worm farming and manuka honey. When that market drops out, we got into a bit of queen bee rearing. When I say we, I'm really talking about the whānau at home. My dad's the land manager there at the moment. Our grandfather was before him. But yeah, like other whenua Māori blocks, there's hundreds of stakeholders that whakapapa back to that whenua, and trustees who are helping to make the decisions. So decision making on most whenua Māori, if you've even got a trustee set up and you've got a land manager in place, which isn't all of them, is quite tricky. And but I think there's also advantages there, because we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of knowledge in the people that are able to make those decisions. So that's a big advantage. It's an advantage for our whole region actually, because those knowledges sit here in our region. And there's a, I guess, special ongoing connection that you get. Those knowledges might not be shared verbally, they might be shared in the things and actions that you're taking on the whenua. And I know someone mentioned earlier, like even as tauiwi, the enduring family year after year after year relationships that we have here in Tairāwhiti is quite special as well, because a lot of our farming and forestry whānau have, go back a few generations. So I guess the one thing I want to communicate in that space is that we are a special and unique region, and we hold some solutions that what we're learning in our nature markets, our global markets, we hold solutions that the world doesn't know. We might think they're second nature to us, but actually we've got some special things to share. So my sector, I guess I'm representing, is this nature markets idea, where we're able to use the data and the information and the proof of mahi, the proof of work on the whenua, to actually assetise and create new revenue streams. That might sound a bit airy-fairy, like what is that? Essentially, there is globally and nationally a whole lot of, markets or organisations willing to pour resource into these activities. What's missing is the infrastructure to do that, because otherwise we would have seen it showing up already. There's been some attempts, such as it's almost a swear word, but the emissions trading scheme, had a little go at that, and it's using one particular type of asset, just carbon. What we're exploring is using biodiversity, fresh water, mahi, workforce goals, well-being of the community, making sure that all of these elements can be counted and can bring resource in. The impact of Cyclone Gabrielle on that kind of market sector is actually, there's some positives in there, because it makes us really confront the challenges that we have and the downfall of our kind of more simplified versions of these market spaces, such as the way that the carbon market has really incentivized exotic planting. So, you've been able to get way more return from planting a fast-growing species than you have from a native forest. But actually, when you see all of those effects and you've got those images we had about our region hitting the globe, that gives us a platform to stand up and say, we can do these things better. We're cleverer now, we can continue to evolve these kind of tools. And so that would be my other point, is that we have the solutions on the ground here that I guess our decision makers, whoever they are, need to really not do the telling of X, Y, Z, this is what you need to do, but enable those decisions to come up from a ground up perspective. The solutions that I can talk to at the tables once we get there to help kind of address our challenges is really that these markets, alongside other markets, alongside all of those creative, innovative solutions for our whenua, the tiger worm farming, the manuka honey, the kānuka oil, I see a future where Tairāwhiti, because we have this land, we've got our knowledge systems, we can kind of all enable those solutions to come up from a whenua first perspective. Then the nature markets can be one additional tool, one additional revenue stream to help us make some of these transitions that's needed. So that's exactly what we're doing at Te Kotuku. We're exploring these new nature markets. We're building some metrics around what data is going to be important and able to be used in these markets, so that more revenue can flow to the whenua based on our own recommendations for that particular piece of land, and then share that out to other land blocks, farms, horticulture, forestry, and others, hopefully, as they emerge.
Kia ora koutou, ko Julian Con Takuingo. My whakapapa, for those of you who understand a little bit about my relationship with the whenua here, is through my stepmother, Hene Con, Tātou Tātou o Te Wairoa, and Ngāti Porou ultimately. So I have been a forester, or in the old days they called us forest rangers in this district since 1979, largely in forest management, forest consulting, and a little bit of working overseas and so on. So I do claim to have some understanding of what's happening in the forest industry in the past. Just give you a little bit of history about what forestry was like. And when I came along, the first plantings in the region were down Railway Road in Whareras in 1959, which was the year I was born. Those plantings, along with the Mangatu plantings, were basically there to encourage forest establishment on erosion-prone land, as well as small production forests. And of course, over time, that expanded up into the coast, where in the 80s, a lot of the plantings up there was what I describe as a social experiment to try and bring whānau back home from the cities. And when I was a forest ranger working up at Tokomaru Bay, we had a workforce of about 70 or 80 young guys, essentially. There were no women in those gangs in those days coming home from the city. So it worked extremely well. A lot of those people are still there now. And of course, over time, the government actions changed the approach to forestry, in that they decided that we had this great resource of timber. What are we going to do about it? We haven't got any money to invest in it, so we need to encourage overseas investors. And so that's resulted in a lot of sale of forests around the country, a lot of what we call crown forest leases, where a foreign company would come in and they would lease the land effectively off the government, so they would have the right to harvest the forest for a period of time. They pay a lease on the land. And of course, in the late 80s, there was a boom in private forest investment all around the country, with the likes of Roger Dickey and Forest Enterprises and Pine Farm Investments here. So the mums and dads of New Zealand decided forestry was a good investment, so they invested in forestry, along with a lot of farmers. So that became a change fundamentally in what happened in the industry. And of course, iwi were becoming stronger at that time as well. So through iwi settlements and their ability to acquire European freehold land and to get their traditional iwi land back, they were able to acquire forests as well. And they've become a real force in the forest industry up until now. And then, of course, more recently, as we all understand, the carbon forestry has become a big thing in New Zealand, where we have very significant carbon forests all around the country now, and of course, not least up on the east coast. So that gives you a little bit of background about the industry. Obviously relies on our whenua to create a timber resource. We sell that timber resource either to domestic and to overseas sources. The vast majority of it from Gisborne region goes over the port. Before the COVID crisis struck, we were exporting just over 4 million tonnes annually out of the Gisborne region. And that was more or less a sustainable level. Like, we could maintain that for probably a 10 to 15 year period. We had a slight decline in volumes. As a result of COVID, of course, the Chinese market's gone a bit whoopsie, and at the moment we are now harvesting about 2.5 million tonnes. And of course, the environmental situation with the cyclones and so on has resulted in a further reduction of those sort of volumes. So the climatic situation has obviously affected our industry very significantly, not only from an economic point of view, but from an environmental point of view. You know, quite honestly, our social licence has sort of almost been eradicated as a result of what's happened downstream and outside the gates of our forests. So we've been working very hard to try and improve that, and we have a process in place and have had for some time to try and get that back. But as you'd understand, it's a long, slow grind from our point of view, and we need to demonstrate that we are trying to do the right thing by way of the community. So the perception that, or the understanding and the goals of what the Eastland Wood Council is doing, and I must say that I'm talking on behalf of the Eastland Wood Council. I'm the current chair of the Eastland Wood Council, and I was asked to take up the role for 6 months after trying to retire for 4 years. I seem to get roped back into these things. But anyway, so for the last 6 months, I've been in this position, and we have deliberate strategies in place where we are trying to improve that social licence. But out in the forest, we're doing quite a number of things and have been for some years around operational improvements and what we're doing. You know, we're improving our roading, we're improving our skidding, we're pulling back more slash, we're burning slash, we're chipping slash, we're cleaning out waterways where it's appropriate, and doing all sorts of other environmental planning, which we hope and will improve what happens inside the gate. So as a result, what you see outside the gate gradually improves. But don't be fooled, it is a long, slow grind, and it's certainly not going to happen overnight, because forestry has a cycle of 25 or 30 years, and you can imagine that if we have a 5-year-old stand of trees at the moment, in order for us to be able to get them to the point where we can do something with them other than just leave them, which is not always desirable when you have things what we call mid-slope failure, where you have 10 or 15-year-old trees which they're just standing there growing, all of a sudden slip into the gully. What do you do about that? I can talk more about detail a bit later on in the groups, if you like, about what we are actually doing operationally, environmentally, and socially, that sort of thing. So I'll leave that to you to ask me those questions, and we can talk about that when we get a bit closer to the time. Is that me? Okay. Thank you.
And Hardy asked me to speak from 2 different organisations and 2 different perspectives, so I don't know if that means I get twice as much time or half as much time, but the first is Mana Taiao Tairāwhiti, so that's a group of residents that came together post-Cyclone Hale, start of January 2023, organised a petition and got 10,000 signatures in 2 weeks following sort of some of the pictures probably and concerns that the community had about the impacts of some of those industries in our community, and that so that first cyclone, I think, catalysed the community to mobilise, and then the second cyclone, Gabrielle, catalysed the politicians to take action, and council had certainly been on board with the petition, and post Gabrielle, the central government got on board and instituted this independent ministerial inquiry into land use in the region. And the petition asked for that inquiry. It also asked council to change the rules in the regional plan around how the plantations are managed, and also asked for council to enforce the rules a bit better. They'd taken some companies to court, 10 I think or more, it's from 2018, but obviously it hadn't done enough from our perspective. And so since then there's been these enforcement orders which have required, so they've resulted in a number of court cases and companies having to demonstrate how they're meeting the very low standard from our perspective of the consents that they have for harvesting and things. And then it also asked for a regional transition plan, because looking at the state of the region, there was little confidence that we could continue to have 300,000 hectares in sheep and beef farm and 150,000 or whatever it is in pine plantations, given the geology and the changing climate. And as a region, we needed to find other alternatives. So a bit like Taranaki's done with its oil and gas and dairy, sort of trying to find alternatives to those. And down south, they had a transition plan where the Tiwai smelter is at Bluff, to try and look. We've relied on this industry forever, and we need to look at what else we could do. We were asking for support for that sort of thing. And I think it's so this is sort of an environmental advocacy role, I guess. We felt like council's got that role, but it's often conflicted because it's beholden to economic drivers, and industry often, from our perspective, has a disproportionate say on policy and things because they make threats that we'll lose jobs, and that's very true if we don't have a better plan. And it was also, I guess, Graham's and his mate have been the sole voice for nature in the region for a long time, and we need groups that would speak more strongly, I guess, on behalf of those species and ecosystems that don't have a voice in processes. As Kerry said, humans came along and did what we wanted to on the land and took out most of the indigenous biodiversity. And as a result, we're left in this region with very little. And then the deer came along and finishing the job off unless we take action quickly. And so just, sort of our perspective on those issues at the moment, we think this process came out of that as well. And then GDC also set up this transition advisory group that many of you will have heard from to date. And that was cool. And it's good to see forestry and farming and environmental interests and regulators coming together, trying to build consensus, because if we can't find consensus, we're going to have this ongoing antagonistic situation, and there's always going to be someone really unhappy with whichever direction. We've got to try and get some agreement about the scale and definition of the problem before we can really get those sustainable solutions in place. So there's been some good work done there with Kerry and his team, and we still think council's undercooking the situation a bit. They've suggested there's about 60,000 hectares that need to be retired from farming and pine plantations. I suspect it's closer to 100 or 120,000, so it's a very conservative approach from our perspective. Others in those industries would say they've been too generous with their land that they're trying to capture, and those are the tensions that we need to work through as a region. And part of that too is this undervaluing of biodiversity and sort of assuming that the land and the environment exist to serve our needs rather than those other species that have a right to exist, and that we've taken that right away from over the last 150 years. And I also think that perhaps the council and their advisors are underestimating the cost of this, and we know it's going to be expensive, and we've heard figures last week sort of suggesting it might be 20 million a year for 10 years that we need to re-establish cover on that retired land. There's also a bit of a push now for more exotics rather than indigenous cover back on there, not necessarily pine, but other exotics. Quoting the advisor to council, we don't want to cook the economy as we head to this nirvana state. Again, I think we just need to be a little more creative in the solutions that we're looking at. So on the other flip, put my other hat on with the time available. Hikurangi Bioactives Limited Partnership was a little company we started 10 years ago, Ruatoria, looking at what we could do up there for jobs and sort of building the economy, diversifying the economy. And we've got some scientists there to look at what's there, looked at things like onion seed because we're so remote, but then settled on kānuka because it's covering so much of the land already. Also looked at kina and cannabis and a few other fungi. But this kānuka research that we started 10 years ago is just looking like it's going to pay dividends over that time. And there was a bit of investment from, I think it was Activate Tairāwhiti back then, which was part of Eastland Community Trust, or not, and anyway, part of Trust Tairāwhiti. They gave us a little grant to help get things going in terms of developing a product from that kānuka, and we take the oil off the leaf, so we sustainably harvest the tree with just a portion of the brush, and looking for these high value products. And so we developed a cream for eczema that we put through a couple of clinical trials, and they've proven really successful. And now we're in a situation where a US company wants to license that, and it's going to mean setting up new extraction facilities utilising that kānuka, and hopefully it's just sort of the first cab off the rank for other products and and taonga species that we can use so that we're learning to live with and within the indigenous forest again, rather than relying on exotic species and crops and things. And so allowing people to stay on the land. And the volumes we're talking about they're looking at retail sales of at least 100 million US within a couple of years. So these are pharmaceutical guys that know how to sell stuff, and that's quite exciting. But what Gabrielle did for us was we started off with a real focus on the Waiapu Valley, which is where we were living and interested with this enterprise. But we realised that these kind of customers don't want to have all of their eggs in one regional basket. So we're going to need to establish other facilities around the country in South Island and West Coast and things. So that's what Gabrielle and the ongoing extreme weather events have meant for that industry. We're still going to, there are a couple of extractors on the coast that we work with already, and we'll probably get to do one or two more, but we're also going to need to move out of the region because we can't rely on the roads existing or being able to even get up to the trees if we have more extreme and frequent events as we had. So that's sort of the good news story, and hoping that there'll be some more of that from others over coming years.